Okay, our next podcast is going to go into the mechanism of evolution. So, evolution was an idea that's been around for a long time, but Darwin really popularized it with promotion of a mechanism called natural selection. Now, he didn't coin that term, but he uses it in describing the change that occurs over time in population. Now, what he observed and the way he describes it is that he observed that in these populations of organisms, you have individuals that vary in characteristics. So you have a population and it has um, lots of different individuals that vary with their characteristics. And also, the second proponent of this idea is, or the second tenet of this idea is that these organisms produce more offspring than the environment can support. All right, so the environment's not going to support all the offspring that occur from these individuals. So some will die out. The inference is that the individuals that are well suited, and by that they means they have the traits that will allow them to survive. Those are going to survive, and those that do not have those traits will die out. And so over time, you'll see more and more of those favorable traits that will accumulate in the population. And so these are the ideas behind this idea of natural selection, the idea that um, individuals are being selected based on the traits that they have. And then over time, the traits will vary in that population. Okay, so that's natural selection. Now we can see this in man's manipulation of traits of organisms. And we can see this in agricultural practices and then also in the breeding of animals, our domesticated animals that we breed. We refer to this as a type of selection, but not natural selection, but artificial selection. So artificial selection is when, say, in agricultural practices, a particular trait is selected for in a crop that is going to help it to produce more or possibly maybe be resistant to certain pests. Maybe there's a trait that will allow that, and so that's selected for. Um, uh, so those will be selected for and then bred for that or uh, in domesticated animals like dogs we breed dogs for certain traits. We have all these different breeds of dogs. We bred everything from Great Danes to Saint Bernards down to Dachshunds and Poodles. So all those are bred. Humans have selected those certain traits they've wanted, and they've bred certain certain different breeds together to get those desired traits. Now, in uh, dogs, you have even now a more recent type breed is uh, breeding um, animals or breeding dogs like labs and poodles, and they can be bred together. And the outcome is they call them labradoodles. So this is kind of a designer breed, and these breeds are supposed to have the temperament of labs and then the hair of poodles that does not shed. And so this breeding, selective breeding of domesticated plants and animals is a type of artificial selection. And it's just creating more variation within this population. And so this variation is a key component for natural selection, or in this case, artificial selection. So it's artificial when man manipulates, gets in, and selects the certain traits that they want. It's natural selection when it's just happening out there in nature, and it's happening due to environmental resistance or the ability of certain individuals to survive, and the other ones will just die out. Um, a classic example of natural selection, your book mentions it. I don't have a slide here, but it's the peppered moth. The peppered moth is a moth that has some different colored traits to it. One of them is lighter in color and one's darker in color, is one of the major differences of variation within this population. During the Industrial Revolution, there was a lot of pollution, and the trees that these moths lived on were stained from that pollution. And so what happened is the dark colored moths used to stand out, and the light colored moths used to blend into the bark of the trees. After this pollution during the Industrial Revolution, the opposite occurred. The light colored moths stood out and the dark colored moths blended in because the bark started changing color from pollution. And so what happened is we went from a dominant color in the population of light wings, light colored wings, to a dominant dark color. So that dark color remained in the population, although it was recessed and it was smaller in the population. This fluctuation, this change in the environment occurred, and we had a complete shift of the variation. And so this kind of shifting and variations happens that was due to pollution, but it can happen due to any kind of disturbance or change that occurs in the environment that the animal lives in, or different types of predation that may move in or occur as well. But that peppered moth, that's a classic example of variation within the fluctuations of variation within the population. Now, one of these examples of a environmental resistance is predation, of course. So animals get killed by prey gets killed by predators, and this is certainly a major factor. So if you have a trait that helps you to avoid predators, you're more likely to survive. So these are the type of traits in nature that are selected for, the traits that help organisms survive. Now, camouflage, of course, is one of the major characteristics that can help you to survive against predation. The peppered moth, that's an example of camouflage, because the dark colored wings, if you blend it in, if the light colored wings blended in, you're less likely to be seen by the predator, which is the birds that would feed off of these moths. So that change in wing color affected whether it was camouflaged or not camouflaged. So camouflage is a major advantage. There's other advantages as well. We'll look at, here's camouflage right here, example of camouflage in these mantis. This is a mantis here that's kind of pink in color, and you can barely even see it there. And here's a mantis that's green, and it's on the green leaves, and this is near the flowering plant here. So this mantis would stand out if it was over in this area, and this mantis would stand out if it was over here, but they're blended in because of their environment that they're in. So camouflage is a major advantage for animals out in nature. Another advantage is the ability to obtain food. This is a finch, is a type of bird that actually Darwin recognized and wrote a lot about. And and he recognized these on the Galapagos Islands, where he spent a lot of time. And what he recognized is on that chain of islands, some of these finches had narrow beaks. On other islands, they would have very broad beaks. And so what he determined from that was that if you had a broad beak, you're able to feed off of seeds and harder types of food. And if the environment was like that, where that was the main food source, then you were better able to survive if you had that broad type beak. If you had a very narrow beak, you would not be able to break those seeds and feed off of that type of food. So that's a certain benefit, that trait of the size of the beak. Somebody wrote a book about these, finches, the beak of the finch. It's, I think, a journalist wrote the book, but it's a very popular book about these finches and what Darwin recognized. Now, certainly this is natural selection. Traits are being selected for. Now, if you had a narrow beak, you may be able to get insects that live down in the bark of trees. And if you have a broad beak, you would not be able to get that. Or maybe if you had a narrow beak, you could eat fruit, and then to get down into the tissue of the fruit. So different sized beaks are going to dictate what type food that you can obtain. And so this is a selecting trait. Okay, here we see some examples of these. There's a cactus eater that's feeding off of the fruit and tissue of the cactus here. It has kind of a medium sized but long beak. Insect eater, these are going to have really long and narrow beaks. And then our seed eaters, of course, have very broad beaks for breaking those seeds. So, but these are all finches, and that's just variation within the population. So if you don't have the type food that you need, you either fly off to another island or you die. And so that's kind of how natural selection works. Here's another example of natural selection, but this is spurred by man's action. So in this case, we have some of these pests of this crop that are resistant to pesticide. All right, so this one with the red mark on its chromosome here has a gene that is resistant to this pesticide. All these ones with the green marks do not have that gene for pest resistance. So when pesticide is applied to the crop here, it is all of them die except for this individual here, and it survives. And if a few of these individuals survive, they go on, produce offspring, and sooner or later, if they're passing their traits on, you're going to have a whole population that is resistant to this pesticide, which makes the farmer not very happy. Now he's got to come up with a different pesticide to attack those. So this same kind of phenomena occurs with bacteria. And doctors prescribe antibiotics. They end up killing all the ones that are not resistant to the antibiotic, and those that do have antibiotic resistance go on to survive. And then you have these what environmentalists call super strains of bacteria, and then these antibiotics do not affect them as readily. And that is why more recently environmental actions have said to not prescribe antibiotics as quickly as has happened in the past, because that creates these super strains of bacteria. Now, very important, we will say that natural selection is not making anything new here. Natural selection is playing with traits that already exist in the finch, in these pests, in the bacteria. We're not making any kind of new trait. There's still beetles, there's still bacteria, there's still finches. So nothing new has come about in this example. But there is a theory that says that new traits could come about and natural selection could play on those through mutations. So mutations are these changes in the genetic makeup that happen through different types of effects on the genetic makeup of the individual. And we'll continue this in our next podcast. We'll pick up here with talking about mutations and what they can do through natural selection.